This video was made for educational purposes only. The vast expanse of national parks, with their rugged terrain and remote locations, often serve as havens for outdoor enthusiasts seeking adventure and solitude. However, beneath the natural beauty and tranquility lies a perplexing phenomenon that continues to baffle authorities and researchers alike. The mysterious disappearances of individuals within these expansive wilderness areas. Each year, a disturbing number of people vanish without a trace, their fates remaining a haunting enigma. Yet, amidst these unsettling narratives of loss and uncertainty, there are rare occurrences where the missing are miraculously found alive and unharmed, sparking both relief and fascination. And sometimes it's the cases with the happy endings that turn out to be shrouded in even more mystery. Cases just like this one, that leave people with more questions surrounding their discovery than their disappearance. So join me, my fellow thrill seekers, as we try to make sense of two cases of people who disappeared under strange and mysterious circumstances, but re-emerged with an even stranger story of survival. Case number 1. Haley Zega. On April 29, 2001, 6-year-old Haley Zega went hiking with her grandparents in the Upper Buffalo Wilderness area, a very remote area of Arkansas. For a location to be classified as a wilderness area, it indicates that no kind of vehicle is able to enter or pass through the area. Hence the name, which describes it as being extremely remote and wild. After following a trail that led them to the top of a bluff that was around 200 feet higher than their starting point, they arrived at a breathtaking overlook with a view of the river below. And at around 11 a.m. is when they eventually turned around to go back. While they were heading back, around 11:30, Haley noticed a waterfall off to the side of the trail. In order to see if they can visit the waterfall, she asks her grandparents. After looking it over, the grandparents realize that the only safe way to view the waterfall is to literally climb a tree and then descend over the sheer edge. Haley's grandparents did not want to go through with it and did not feel secure enough to let their granddaughter do it, simply because it was too dangerous. In the end, they told her no and that they would continue to follow the trail. However, 6-year-old Haley had a temper tantrum, then she sat down on the trail, telling her grandparents, "If you are not taking me, then I am not moving, you're gonna have to carry me." But her grandparents said, "No, Haley, we're absolutely not going to carry you. You need to be a big girl and walk with us," but Haley ultimately refused. At that point, her grandparents began making jokes with her, telling her if she didn't come out right now that they would leave without her. So, they began walking down the trail as if they were really going to leave her. They only made it a few yards before Haley got up and started following from a short distance. Her grandparents noticed, so as they made their way down the trail, they would periodically turn back to make sure Haley was still following them. The grandparents realized that the closer Haley got to them, the more she would slow down. But her grandparents could tell that she was just trying to get under their skin, by walking slow and intentionally taking as long as she could. But her grandparents made sure they kept her in their views so that they didn't walk too far ahead of her. So they continued to walk down the trail, and periodically they would turn back to make sure she was still following them. They did this for some time as there was still a gap between them and Haley. But at some point when they turned back to check if Haley was still behind them, she was nowhere in sight. So once they realized this, they both run back down the trail towards where Haley should have been. First, they search both sides of the trails, looking behind trees and anywhere else she could be hiding. Since they initially believed that she might be merely hiding from them and playing a joke. They are calling her name and yelling for her to come out. But when they were met with silence, they quickly understood that this was not a joke and that she was not merely avoiding them, rather, she was actually missing. Her grandparents were so distraught that for the next 90 minutes, they would run up and down this trail shouting her name in an attempt to find their granddaughter, without success. They then descended and left the forest to call the police after failing to locate her. And so began the largest ever search and rescue operation in Arkansas history, involving hundreds of searchers, 8 dog teams, firefighters, the National Guard, and more, all in an attempt to locate Haley. However, after 2 days, nothing had changed. The only clue they had was that one of the dogs followed her scent until it came to an end near a road. The initial theory held by investigators was that Haley had found her way to the road and been picked up by a car. But then, after only 51 hours of looking and only 2 miles from the place she went missing, 2 searchers who weren't in a part of the initial search area actually located her. With her feet hanging in the water, she had been perched on a rock. And when she saw the rescuers, she waved at them. "Hey, are you Haley Zega?" they asked. She replied, "Yes, I am." She seemed to be in a good mood, and in good health, aside from a few scratches and insect bites. Following her rescue, Haley was taken to the hospital for an examination. After the doctors declared that she was in excellent health, detectives visited her with the intention of learning more about how she had survived and how she had become lost. And the information Haley provided the investigators chilled them to the core. Haley claimed that while attempting to catch up to her grandparents, she happened to glance down and noticed that they had vanished when she looked back up. And a wall of vegetation and trees stood in front of her. It seemed as though she had entered a different reality because she was no longer on the trail. The investigators then asked, "Who is Alicia?" "Oh, she is my imaginary friend. I met her on the bluff," Haley responded. Her parents and the investigators saw right away that she was obviously using the creation of this imaginary friend as a coping mechanism for the traumatic experience. Her parents and the investigators saw right away that she was obviously using the creation of this imaginary friend as a coping mechanism for the traumatic experience. They stopped inquiring about the imaginary friend as a result. So instead, they asked her how she got down from the bluff. Because there's only one path down, and finding it can be challenging, particularly if you are not following the trail. At which point Haley said, "Alicia led me down the bluffs and showed me the trail. She stood in front of me to make sure I did not fall forward." So her parents and the investigators are now starting to think like, maybe this isn't an imaginary friend if this person is in front of her propping her up. They then ask Haley to characterize Alicia's appearance. Haley replies, "Sure, she is 4 years old, shorter than me, with brown eyes and black hair, and she enjoys singing and telling jokes." After that, Haley started singing songs that she had picked up from Alicia and told them jokes that she had also picked up from her. Investigators could not believe that Alicia, a 4-year-old girl, could be running around the bluffs, even though Haley was describing her so vividly. As a result, investigators simply resumed interviewing Haley while continuing to regard Alicia as merely an imaginary friend who served as a temporary coping mechanism. They did their best to gather as much information as they could about Haley's journey from the bluff to the river, and when they concluded that she was well and did not require any further care, they released her from the hospital and basically said, "Okay, that is all, see you later." Following that, Haley's case gained significant attention. The story made headlines, particularly after she was located and brought home safely. And so, the interview in which she claimed that an imaginary friend named Alicia had supported her during her entire ordeal and helped her overcome her fears was actually published. After it began to circulate, some readers discovered that another young girl had vanished 23 years earlier in the same exact location as Haley. And get this, she was 4 years old, she had black hair, brown eyes, her name was Alona, and she had died on those bluffs where Haley said she had met her imaginary friend Alicia. Once this connection was made, it garnered national media attention. Because, suddenly news outlets were all claiming that her imaginary friend was actually Alona, Haley's guardian angel. Haley was brought on Dateline shortly after, to discuss her story and her imaginary friend. Currently, in her 20s, Haley maintains a YouTube channel where she shares her story and the events that transpired during her 51-hour disappearance. She also discusses her imaginary friend in the story, where she goes on to say, "I never had an imaginary friend before Alicia, and I never had an imaginary friend after Alicia. But at the time, Alicia felt very real to me, and I don't know who or what she was, but she saved my life." Case number 2. Henry Brookshire. In the summer of 1904, 11-year-old Henry Brookshire decides to go gather blackberries on his own, one early morning in Forbes State Park, on the eastern slope of Chestnut Ridge located in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. Henry ventured into the forest alone to find a large patch of blackberry bushes that his siblings and him would pick from every year when he somehow gets lost, and comes across a log cabin in the forest that he's never seen before. He investigates the cabin from a safe distance. That's when he sees two young children about his age accompanied by a dog, exit the house playing in laughter. The dog soon notices Henry, so he introduces himself. The children seem nice, so they begin to play. They enjoy playing for some time before an adult woman's voice can be heard telling the children to come eat dinner, which Henry expects to be their mother. They invite Henry to have dinner and he accepts the invitation. Upon entering the house, Henry notices two older teenage boys in the house, one of which is his 16-year-old neighbor Gavin, and the other he expects to be the other children's brother. Henry, the two children, their brother, and Gavin all sit at the table where hot bowls of porridge are prepared for each of them, along with two extra bowls and chairs for what he expects are for their parents, but the parents never end up joining them for dinner. Gavin and the other teenage boy finish their bowls first and excuse themselves from the table. About 10 minutes later, they all three finish their bowls. Henry was planning to ask Gavin to lead him home after dinner, but quickly realized they must have left already, considering they were no longer at the cabin. Henry then asks the two children if they have ever been to the blackberry patch in the forest before. They tell him yes, it's only about a mile away from the cabin. He asks them if they can bring him there, as he figured he could find his way home from there. The children agree to bring him, so they set off into the woods. As they begin walking, they've probably only walked about 50 feet when Henry asks the children if they should bring their dog with them. They responded no, and as he asks them, he kind of turns back to see if the dog was going to follow them, and as he looks back, he notices that the cabin is no longer there. But they only walked about 50 feet into the woods, so the cabin should definitely still be in sight, but it wasn't. Then the children began asking Henry questions about his home life and if he had any siblings, so Henry just brushed off the fact that the cabin just disappeared. Henry said, "Didn't you already ask me that?" The children didn't answer, they just looked at each other with a creepy smile, and before they knew it, they walked into a huge clearing in the forest that had a beautiful stream on one side, and on the other side was a beautiful field full of wildflowers of all colors and types that covered the clearing floor. What Henry remembered the most was the sun shining so bright that everything was radiant and glistening. The flowing stream alive with schools of fish and families of ducks. Our family's been living off of these woods for generations, and never have we ever learned of this place. As they got to the end of the clearing, the children stopped it and told Henry if he kept following the path, he would run into the blackberry patch in about a half of a mile. He thanked the children for their hospitality, and they parted ways. Henry turned and began to walk the path for about a total of 2 seconds when he realized he never got the children's names. So he turned around to ask them before they could have made it more than a couple of feet, but when he turned around, they were gone. Suddenly the sun got so bright Henry began to squint. He attempted to raise his hand in front of his eyes, but before he could, suddenly, the clearing full of flowers, the glistening stream, and all its beauty turned into dark, dense forest. And the bright sun, suddenly, became the bright light of a flashlight, shining directly in his face. Henry was quickly surrounded by family and friends calling his name and asking him if he was all right. Confused, Henry said, "Of course I'm all right, what's the big idea?" And people are hugging him and asking him where he's been, and Henry gets quickly overwhelmed, so he threw his arms up and says, "Everyone just stop." "What is going on?" he asks nervously. "Henry, we've been worried sick about you, you've been missing for the past 3 days, one of his family members said. And Henry, clearly in disbelief, sees his neighbor, the older teen that was at the cabin Henry came across, and says, "I was just with you about an hour ago, go ahead, tell them." "Remember, we were at the cabin eating porridge." And the neighbor, looking very confused, said, "No Henry, I've been worried sick about you, and I've been with your family since you went missing and didn't come home the first night." Thank you so much for sticking around and watching this video through its entirety. Your support truly means the world to me. And if you enjoyed this type of content, Don't forget to subscribe, turn on all notifications and share it with your friends. Remember, your feedback keeps me motivated and helps me create even better content for you, so if you would like to see more videos about the creepy and mysterious, just like this one, then check back in a couple days, because I post new videos once or twice a week. Well, until next time, thank you again, and stay awesome.